Hi everybody, it's your human anatomy and physiology teacher, Mr. Poser. Today we are finishing our unit on the skeletal system by getting into the axial skeleton anatomy. So in our last video we discussed and we identified different structures in the appendicular skeleton. Today we are getting into the axial skeleton, which is, if you don't remember, this is your skull, in your thorax, and your backbone, your vertebral column as well. All right, so that makes up your axial skeleton, and we're going to get into this kind of complicated diagram of the skull. You have lots of bones in your face and in your head, so we're going to talk about them. Well, we're not just going to talk about bones. We're going to talk about a few processes on here, as well as some joints that we're going to find as well. All right, so let's get into it. Let's do the cranial bones first, and if you remember the cranial bones, I have my friend over here that I'm going to be modeling with. This is not a real human skull, by the way. There's a real one over there, but it's not very complete. So we're going to use this fake one. Anyway, here's your cranium. Okay, it's got your brain inside. If I open this guy up over here, look. Oh, well, that's not supposed to be split up, but there's your brain. Okay, the point is that your cranial bones are going to be holding your brain in place. So that is something to differentiate right there. So that's where we're going to start. This big yellow bone that makes up the upper portion of your eye socket, as well as your forehead and a little bit of the top of your head. It's called your frontal bone. And it makes sense because it's at the front, right? So frontal bone is right up here. It protects the frontal lobe of your brain, and we actually refer to this region as the frontal region. So there you have it. Just posterior to the frontal bone are the parietal bones. And so this big purple one over here, purplish, I don't even know, maroon, burgundy, that is called the parietal bone. Okay, we got a couple of them right here. You have a suture coming down your head like so. I'm about to show you. So you got two parietal bones on either side. And then what you have kind of meeting up in the middle is this orange bone. Right over here. This is also a cranial bone. It's called the temporal bone. You have temporal lobes in your brain, or you have a temporal lobe, I should say. And this is where it extends all the way down to here on your head, and it includes where your ear hole is. It's also called your external acoustic meatus, but we're not going to talk about that. So there's your temporal bone. Let's see, and then back here, the very back of your head. This is what we call the occipital bone. Occipital. In the occipital region, as I said, this is the back of your head, and your brain. That lobe of your brain is called the occipital lobe. So there you have it. You're going to be seeing those words again. So there's your four main cranial bones. All right. So let's talk about these squiggly lines that we see in between each one. And these squiggly lines are actually they're joints, but they're actually called sutures. And if you look closely at a cranium, this is not a real one. Again, I have a real cranium, but you can see these squiggly lines up here, and they're not cracks in your skull. They're not like, evidence that, somebody dropped you on your head as a baby. But what they're, that's kind of dark. What they're actually evidence of is that these bones fuse together through development. So at this point right here, these are at these, I should say, at these ridges or these sutures. These are where these bones kind of fuse together into adulthood. So you actually have cartilage connecting all these bones until all that cartilage is converted into bone itself. So you have a solid cranium up here. Babies and young kids, they don't have that fusion and that ossification just yet. So kids have like a soft spot in their head where those bones have not fused yet because of that cartilage. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about next. The sutures, this one up here is called the coronal suture. Coronal, yeah, corona, oh my gosh. No, it's referring to that's where a crown would go. That's where a crown would sit, is right by your coronal suture. And that's coronal is referring to a crown. That's what corona means, it's a crown. Anyway, so moving on from there, so the coronal suture or coronal suture separates out the frontal bone and the parietal bone. Over here, this one kind of zigzagging across. This is called the lateral suture. I had to think about it for a second. This is the lateral suture. And you know what? Let's add suture up here. coronal suture, because we need to make sure that we know what those are. There's your coronal suture, your lateral suture. Lateral is referring to the sides. And then this third suture back here, that's kind of separating out the temporal bone, the parietal bone, and the occipital bone. This is called the, get ready for this, lambdoid suture. What the heck is lambdoid? Well, there's a Greek letter. It's called lambda, and lambda is kind of shaped like an S a little bit, and so is this suture. So a lambda is kind of shaped like this line over here, so that's why we call it the lambdoid suture. Sometimes you've got to think like, oh, who comes up with this stuff? But you know, people have different letters, right? So lambda, okay, shaped like an L, or the lambda, not like an L. Anyway, let's keep going. Let's start with the facial bone over here. Let's do these ones. Okay, then we'll get to these processes. This red structure over here, this is your jawbone. You might already know this. Your jawbone is also known as your mandible. All right, so your mandible is your lower jaw. That's where your teeth are, or your lower teeth, I should say. And the other bone that helps make up your mouth, where your upper teeth are, this is called, this purple structure over here, this is called your maxilla. Maxilla. All right, so you have maxillary teeth and you have mandibular teeth. So your lower teeth and your upper teeth are maxillary and mandibular. Over here, this little kind of dot in the middle of the mandible, this is called the mandibular foramen. I'm not exactly sure what that does. I'll be honest with you. Google it. I don't have time to Google it in this video, but Google it. I'm not sure what it does. I'd be interested to know. But that's what it's called, the mandibular foramen. All right, moving on from there, your cheekbones. Up here, if you feel around with your thumbs, you're not really supposed to touch your face nowadays, but if you feel up here with your thumbs, you can feel kind of a point. So on my skull over here, can you see them? There we go. Okay, right up here, this is what is called your zygomatic bone. Here's your mandible, here's your maxilla, right? But your zygomatic bones, there we go, are going to be making up these points. And if you feel around, you can, kind of feel this point over here. So this is called your zygomatic. Who comes up with this stuff? There's a good reason for it. I'm sure there is. I just don't know what it is. So there's your zygomatic bone. All right. From there, I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit. This bone right here, okay, helps make up your nose. Okay, the rest of your nose, your what would that be? The most anterior part of your nose is made up of hyaline cartilage, but there is a portion of it that is bone, so thus it is called the nasal bone. Makes sense, right? Okay, now we have these three kind of conspicuous structures over here, these three conspicuous bones that help, make the sides of your face and help make up the eye socket and also a little bit of the nasal cavity. So we're going to be talking about those in a second. This pink bone right here, just under where it says temporal bone, this is called the sphenoid bone. Sphenoid. S-P-H-E-N-O-I-D. Sphenoid bone. All right, so going from the sphenoid bone, we move anterior to, this is called the ethmoid bone. So the ethmoid bone. And then finally, in front of that, there's the ethmoid, excuse me. Sorry, guys. The orange structure, the orange bone over here, this is the ethmoid bone. And then anterior to that, this is where we find the lacrimal bone. So sphenoid, ethmoid, and lacrimal bone. All right, if we take a look at our skull over here, okay, the sphenoid bone, let's see. There we go. It's going to be right over here. Okay, there's your sphenoid bone, and you can kind of see some differences in the. Well, you can't really see it right now, but you can kind of see some differences where you can separate out the sphenoid from the ethmoid and the lacrimal. But here's the lacrimal. Oop, can't really see it. There's the lacrimal right here, and here's the ethmoid right behind it. So it helps make up part of your eye socket. So there you have it. All right, a few more structures I want to point out. These are both processes over here, and the processes, these are kind of anchor points for muscles. You have a lot of muscles in your face. You can make a lot of different facial expressions. So you need a lot of muscles, and thus those muscles need a lot of points to attach to your skull, because that's what muscles do. They attach to bones so they can move them around. All right. So this structure back here, you can actually feel it. If it's, it kind of hurts a little bit. It's like the pressure point. But you can kind of feel it behind your ears. There's like a knob if you feel it hard enough. It's called the mastoid process. Okay, so the mastoid process is kind of this lump over here. Males have bigger ones than females do, so that's another way to identify sex when you're looking at a dead body or bones. Okay, right there, that is the mastoid process. Mastoid. Okay, and then this other kind of pointy thing coming down from your ear, that is another process. It's actually an attachment point for a lot of your neck muscles. This is called the styloid process. Styloid process. All right, so there it is. Those are all the structures that I would like you to know for the skull. There you have it. Oh, styloid process. Oop, jaw came out. There's the styloid process right there, and here's the styloid process. Okay, so it's kind of like these pointy things coming out, but they're attachment points for muscles. All right, so let's get into the rest of the axial skeleton, the vertebral column over here. We can divide the vertebral column up into three main categories down here. So these brackets are kind of indicating what these are. So the yellow region up here, these are what we call the cervical vertebrae, because they make up your neck. So these are your neck bones up here. You have, I would like you to point out that there are seven cervical vertebrae. Okay. And they're aptly named C1, C2, C3. Except for the top two, well, C1 and C2 have special names. This is called your atlas. And the very top neck bone helps kind of rotate your head a little bit. And just beneath that is the axis. So C1 and C2, those are called the atlas and axis. And you got 26 vertebrae here. So when we add all these up, it's going to add up to 26. Okay, moving on from there, this red region, this other bracket to the left, this is called the thoracic vertebrae, and there are 12. There are 12 thoracic vertebrae, so they are named T1, T2, T3, all the way down to T12. And what would that be? Inferior to the thoracic vertebrae on the other side is what we call the lumbar vertebrae. And guess how many you have here? You have 5. All right, so if we add these up so far, we have 7 plus 12 plus 5. That adds up to 24. So where are the other two? Well, we've already kind of talked about them a little bit. Here's your sacrum. That counts as 1. And just below that is the coccyx, which we talked about last week as well. Okay, the pelvic girdle, maybe the sacrum and the coccyx still belong in the axial skeleton. But the rest of the pelvic girdle, it's where your legs attach, so it's called appendicular. All right, anyway, there's your 26. 7 plus 12 is 19, plus 5 is 24, and 25, 26. There are your 26 vertebrae. Okay, and our last thing that we're going to talk about here, we got 3 different types of ribs, and we got different structures on the sternum as well. So let's get into it. Up here, the uppermost part of the sternum, it should be right over here. It's pretty close to your collarbone. This is called the manubrium of the sternum. Okay, it articulates with some of the pectoral muscles, allows you to make different motions with your arms and with your chest. Over here, the middle portion of the sternum is what we call the sternum body. The sternum body. That makes sense, right? It's right in the middle. And the most inferior part of the sternum, it's another process. Okay, it's another attachment point or an anchoring point for various muscles. It's called the xiphoid process. Xiphoid, Xiphoid. If you ever want a good word in hangman, there it is. Xiphoid process. Good stuff. Okay, from there, we're going to talk about 3 different types of ribs. And these classifications of ribs, not only are they classified by where they are, but their attachment to the sternum. So this blue stuff in here, this is all hyaline cartilage. So none of the ribs actually, are bone on bone with the sternum. like other bones might be. But yeah, this cartilage here is called costal cartilage, and it's able to help expand your chest cavity. It makes it more flexible. All right, but anyway, these top ones are called true ribs because they have the most attachment to the sternum. Down here, okay, we have more cartilage that's required to get it to the inferior portion of the sternum. So these are called false ribs. True ribs, false ribs, and then we have a few that aren't even attached to the sternum at all, and those are what we call floating ribs. Okay, that is it for this video on the appendicular skeleton. Yes, the next page is blank. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll see you next time.